everyone loves the X-Men franchise. Even if they don't, they've at least heard of the franchise or the movies. I recently found myself rewatching the movies again. The last time I watched these being when I was a kid, and my dad was watching them on either HBO or Star Movies back when TVs had cable. Of course, The Last Stand was one of my favorites, so I wanted to know more about everything, and the things I found were crazy. I'm talking so many things happened because of one little thing crazy. It was like a single event that triggered a chain reaction, then snowballed into a disaster. Of course, that's why I'm here with you guys. So today, we're gonna be talking about WTF happened to X-Men The Last Stand. And it all started with Bryan Singer, or Brett Ratner, whichever one you think is responsible. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Overview. Let's start with a quick recap. The X-Men franchise, based on the Marvel comics made by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby in 1963, centers on a group of mutants that fight for peace and equality while the world hates on them for being different. Mutants are people born with a genetic trait known as the X gene. Gene, not chromosome, don't get it confused, which gives them superhuman abilities that manifest during puberty. The main people, aside from the recurring characters like Cyclops and Wolverine, would be Professor Charles Xavier, a super powerful telepath that founded Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters, and Magneto, his ex-friend. Their ideologies are the complete opposite, with Xavier hoping to create a peaceful coexistence between mutants and humans, while Magneto thinks they're the next step in evolution and should rule over mankind. There is a small justification here, being that he survived the Holocaust, which was a terrible thing. But he's still the antagonist nonetheless. The rest of the series is just them battling out which is the superior group. So X-Men The Last Stand is the last film in the original X-Men trilogy. The Worthington Labs, a pharmaceutical corporation, managed to create a cure from a genome. The genome came from a young mutant living on Alcatraz Island called Jimmy. Jean Grey, one of the recurring characters in the series, had committed suicide earlier in the series to stop the Phoenix from causing any more destruction. The Phoenix is actually a cosmic deity that could manipulate reality and creation in every which way possible, and it prefers doing that by connecting to a person. That person was Jean, and it had been there ever since she was young. Anyways, Cyclops finds her alive and breathing by Alkali Lake, but he gets killed when Phoenix takes over. When she's found by Wolverine and Storm later, they get her back to the mansion while Xavier tells them more about Phoenix. Sometime during this, Jean goes back to her childhood home for a bit. Then Magneto and Xavier both decide to seek her out for help. But when the Phoenix resurfaced again, it destroyed the house, disintegrated Xavier, and allied itself with Magneto. Magneto's next target is to attack Alcatraz Island to kill Jimmy so that there are no more chances to create the cure. But the remaining X-Men, and then some, arrive to stop them. During then, Beast managed to inject Magneto with a cure that neutralizes and hence erases his powers, while Wolverine goes after Jean. Jean is now fully under the Phoenix and is destroying everything, and Wolverine is the only one with a healing factor, so he's physically the only one able to get close to her. When she briefly regains control, she begs him to save her, and with no other choice, Wolverine kills her. As for the aftermath, mutant rights are secured. Storm is the new headmistress of Xavier's School. Beast serves as the UN ambassador. Rogue decides to take the cure herself, allowing her to finally touch Iceman. But there is also a final scene and a post-credits scene worth noting as well, with the final scene implying that Magneto's powers may not be completely gone, while the post-credits show that Xavier's consciousness survived by jumping into a comatose patient's body. Bryan Singer abandoned the trilogy he started and took half the team with him. Okay, now we get to the ugly. Bryan Singer, the man and the mind behind the entire X-Men franchise, created the foundation and the majority of the cinematic universe's framework. However, during the production of the third film, he suddenly decided to abandon the franchise and direct Superman Returns instead. Since the movie was committed to a specific release date, it created chaos within the studios. As if that wasn't bad enough, Singer didn't even have a detailed or even developed storyline for the third film, just a partial story with general ideas about the Dark Phoenix saga. To add to this disaster, he didn't leave alone, but took several key people responsible for the creative works of this movie, like the scriptwriters, Dan Harris and Michael Dougherty, composer John Ottman, and even the original Cyclops actor, James Marsden. This meant creating a new script from scratch, finding a new composer, and significantly reducing Cyclops' screen time and killing off his character way too early in the film. Killing off Cyclops early in the movie upset me greatly, but when I found out why, I wasn't sure whether to be mad or upset anymore. With a release date looming, no director, and an incomplete script, Fox Studios was scrambling. While they first hired Matthew Vaughn to direct it, he dropped out later because of various issues, which I'll get into, bringing in Brett Ratner. If Singer's actions were the spade that cut into the franchise's grave, then Ratner dug the rest of it. While I'll explain myself in detail later, the production was horribly rushed, causing a mishandling of many major comic book storylines like the Dark Phoenix Saga and the Mutant Cure plot point. Years later, though, when Singer was asked about this again, he expressed his regret over leaving the franchise for Superman Returns, stating that he knew X-Men 3 was quite rushed and he didn't complete it, and he felt a little like it was probably his responsibility to do that as a filmmaker, and he didn't. He did return to the franchise later to direct movies like X-Men Days of Future Past and X-Men Apocalypse. But yes, Singer, it was your responsibility and you failed as a filmmaker. The director's musical chairs. Matthew Vaughn almost saved it. Coming back to Matthew Vaughn, when he was on board the crew, he quickly started the pre-production process and casting for the movie. However, weeks before filming, he left the project, quoting, "unethical studio behavior." The subject of said behavior? Halle Berry. We all know Halle Berry from movies like Cloud Atlas, Catwoman, and Moonfall. Executives wanted her on board to cast as Storm, so they did something rather problematic, to say the least. When Vaughn was involved, he found two vastly different scripts in circulation. The original one and a significantly fatter one the executives called the Halle Berry script. While the first one had a rather limited role for Storm, the Halle Berry one featured a rather expanded and prominent storyline into her character. While it wasn't centered on her per se, it did feature her opening scene being in Africa, where Storm would save children dying from thirst with a thunderstorm. Vaughn was told by executives that the expanded script was only to get her on board, and it would then be chucked once she was officially cast. Utterly appalled by the deception of the plan, he deemed it rather unethical and possibly showing the problematic stud politics. Before he could get any more involved in the chaos, he left the show. When asked further, he explained, "I was like, wow, you're gonna do that to an Oscar-winning actress playing Storm? I'm out of here." Even Halle Berry herself confirmed this account, calling it shady shit. Girl, I believe you. Brett Ratner got 6 weeks to prepare for a $210 million blockbuster. Whew, boy. If there was one word to summarize the 6 weeks used to make this movie, hell, nightmare, among other things, of course. When Ratner took over as director, he was only given 6 to prepare for this project. A project on as big a scale as this one would normally take a year. So this itself sealed the fate of the movie and, in turn, the franchise. Since more importance was placed on the release date instead of the quality of the movie, everything went downhill faster than you can say Mutant. Production designer Ed Verreau talked about the chaos with last-minute adjustments and retrofitting ideas on the fly. This included locations that were often scouted and then rejected at the last minute, which meant immediate script adjustments and adding more pressure on the entire crew. Actor availability was also something they couldn't adjust. Mystique being cured and getting abandoned by Magneto? Rebecca Romijn had scheduling conflicts. Anna Paquin, the actress playing Rogue, had her character arc reduced heavily, pushing her towards taking the cure. And of course, we don't need to talk about Marsden, the man who was supposed to play Cyclops. Of course, we can't forget the logistical nightmares caused by this. Filming in Vancouver during the winter meant frequent weather caused by either snow, rain, or fog, complicating an already impossible schedule. This included how the final battle on Alcatraz Island was an elaborate sequence requiring 11 different visual effects companies working against the clock to deliver the CGI in time. Do you know what the blank out moment was for me in all this? The fact that Ratner somehow thought it was a good idea to start post-production processes on the first day of shooting itself. The moment scenes were filmed, they were sent over to editors, meaning crucial creative decisions were being made without the full picture. How brilliant. 2 massive storylines shoehorned into one 104-minute movie. One of the major reasons behind criticism for the movie would be the sloppy work of the storyline adaptations. 2 of the major, massive, and complex storylines in this franchise that were featured in this movie were the Dark Phoenix Saga and the Mutant Cure plotlines explored in this film. While both narratives were rich enough to garner their own movies, shoehorning them together caused neither of them to receive the necessary attention or depth. First, let's talk about the Dark Phoenix saga. Widely considered one of the greatest and most iconic X-Men storylines in Marvel history. This particular storyline focused on Jean Grey's fall to a cosmic destructive power and her later redemption. In The Last Stand, though, the complexity wasn't respected, and the character arc was relegated as a B storyline that was second to the Cure plot, hence failing to make it clear that the Phoenix was a proper, super powerful cosmic entity and not a repressed, powerful alternate personality that was presented in the movie. When Simon Kinberg, one of the writers for The Last Stand, and the writer-cum-director of the standalone Dark Phoenix was interviewed, he openly regretted how the plotline was handled, but also admitted that in 2006, the sheer darkness and dramatic weight of Jean's story may have been a bit daunting on a huge $200 million studio movie. As for the mutant cure plot, the storyline had a strong premise, a controversial cure that forces mutants to choose between their powers and a normal life, hence creating a chasm between Professor Xavier's peaceful approach and Magneto's militant response. However, with the rapid pacing and the need to merge both storylines into one movie, the entire product felt rushed and underdeveloped. The attempt to simultaneously conclude the trilogy while adapting these two enormous storylines resulted in a film that was overstuffed and anticlimactic. Cyclops' inexplicable death was the red flag no one heeded. We all screamed, cried, or just stared at the screen in silence when Cyclops was killed. I think it's been established by now as to why it was done, what with him leaving the movie for Superman Returns. However, instead of finding a creative solution or a narrative way to work around his absence, they decided to kill him off early in the film, off-screen. The way this was executed, though, signaled a rather larger problem with the film's approach to the character development and pacing, making this feel less like a meaningful story beat and more like a studio decision imposed upon the script. This was not only because it removed a key protagonist from the film, but also because it weakened the emotional impact of Jean's fall to the Dark Phoenix, because the character with the deepest emotional connection to her was gone way too fast. This, to fans and critics alike, was the first major red flag to fans that the film was prioritizing production convenience over coherent storytelling. The Dark Phoenix was sidelined into oblivion. Jean Grey was a MacGuffin. I want to talk more about the effect the movie had on the Dark Phoenix saga part of the franchise. The essence of the original comic storyline revolved around Jean's intense internal battle between her moral core fighting against the seductive power and corruption of the Phoenix entity. She ultimately chooses to sacrifice herself after realizing the scope of the devastation she had caused. What does the entire arc entail? A choice. Her choice. Her agency to make that choice as to whether she wants to lose her life in this fight or not. In the movie, however, that agency wasn't given to her. If anything, it was stripped from her. Among the multiple things that would attest to this, Jean Grey has very little dialogue in the film, making it difficult for the audience to understand her internal struggle or motivation. Instead of exploring Jean's perspective, the narrative is about how others react to her power. Xavier wants to repress it. Magneto wants to exploit it, and Wolverine is somewhat of an awkward romantic interest. She's rarely seen making decisions on her own because things either happen to her or other characters act upon her. Again, no agency is granted to the actual character suffering at the moment. In the end, the movie became about the ideological conflict between Xavier and Magneto, with Jean's power serving as the arena for their final battle, rather than focusing on the actual character and her personal tragedy. Because the mutant cure plot and the Xavier versus Magneto dynamic were prioritized, the emotional core of the Dark Phoenix saga was gutted rather brutally. Personally, I'm not sure which one was worse, how the film didn't delve into the psychological corruption of Jean's mind, or how it failed to build the emotional stakes necessary for her eventual, if not forced, death. Ultimately, Jean Grey was a walking plot device whose tragic arc was reduced to a rushed conclusion where she briefly regains control of her faculties only long enough to beg Wolverine to kill her, with this approach failing to deliver the profound depth of the source material, hence leaving fans with a hollow adaptation of a legendary story. Character deaths were treated as afterthoughts. One of the biggest things that makes people cry is the death of a character. This is especially the case for major characters. When you're online, scouring media, or even fanfiction, major character deaths are something a majority of people avoid rather religiously. And yet, This film treated all the deaths in this movie so callously that it scared me. The Last Stand treated major character deaths like they were afterthoughts, essentially sacrificing emotional depth for rushed pacing and logistical convenience. Unlike the other two movies, where every character arc felt considered, the third film killed off central figures carelessly or left life-altering choices with little to no emotional payoff. This is shown in the cases of multiple characters. When Xavier is disintegrated by the Dark Phoenix, you'd expect there to be an emotional fallout longer than 3 seconds. After all, they just lost their leader, mentor, and parental figure. However, the film quickly moves on, shifting focus back to the team and the main plot. The post-credit scene, though, shows that he's still alive, hence nullifying any emotional weight his sacrifice may have held. The same can be said for Magneto as well, where he loses his power after being injected by the cure, but the final scene implied that his powers may not be completely gone, hence giving it a chance to resurface. Rogue's central struggle was the inability to touch others, including her partner, so the film builds towards taking that cure for that, but the decision is presented rather ambiguously. Magneto lost all his nuance and became a one-dimensional villain. In X-Men and X2, Magneto's shown as a compelling and nuanced antagonist, the role filled perfectly by Ian McKellen. However, in The Last Stand, the complexity was stripped away, hence reducing him to a one-dimensional generic villain. The regression is glaringly obvious in a single moment, and that's when he abandoned Mystique. Mystique was one of the mutants that Magneto recruited personally in the comics. When she gets hit by a dart carrying the cure, though, she loses her powers, leading her to beg Magneto for help. The same man who preached that all mutants should stay together was now pushing her aside without a second thought, claiming that he lost all interest in her because she was now a human. This turned the complex villain with a tragic past into a petty leader interested only in power and dominance. This could be attributed to the overcrowded script and rushed production. After all, only so much could be done in 6 weeks, especially considering that there were 2 massive storylines competing for time, costing the subtle character development that defined the first 2 films. The mutant cure plotline was actually decent, but suffocated by Dark Phoenix. Despite the shallow portrayal the mutant cure plotline had, the story had a lot of potential, enough to warrant its own movie. This was because the idea of having a cure after all this time raised genuine questions about identity, choice, and minority rights that are central to the crux of many of the X-Men characters. The premise offered powerful thematic material. Is being a mutant a disease to be cured? Do mutants have the right to choose a normal life over their powers? If the mutant cure story arc had been executed properly, it could have been a solid and thoughtful entry into the franchise. This would also add on to the Xavier versus Magneto dynamic, with the cure creating a perfect schism between Xavier's philosophy of integrating everyone together and Magneto's separatist revolutionary stance. The critical and fan backlash was immediate and devastating. After everything I said, I don't think we need to go any further as to show how the audience reception went. Rotten Tomatoes only gave it a 57% compared to the previous 81 and 85%. And IMDb rated it 6.6 out of 10. While the critics were polite about it, the consensus was that the film prioritized spectacle over the thoughtful character work and thematic depth that had previously defined the franchise. As for the fans, well, the disappointment would have oozed out of the fandom. Almost 90 to 95% of them felt like the film was made by a creative team that didn't understand or care about the franchise at all. The handling of the Dark Phoenix saga felt rushed and shallow. Many of the deaths or character abandonments were horrible, and fans could easily tell the film was chaotically produced, calling it a collection of ideas jammed together rather than a cohesive story. The franchise never fully recovered. It led to Dark Phoenix. Fox tried to revive the franchise. I'll give it that much credit. There were attempts made, like X-Men Origins Wolverine and X-Men First Class. The Origins were a set of planned trilogy movies that were supposed to focus on Wolverine, Magneto, and Mystique, but with the horrible reception of The Last Stand, it wasn't received well. First Class, however, did critically well, but that locked the films into a prequel structure. The pure irony in all this, though, is Dark Phoenix. Because the movie didn't do its due diligence towards the namesake plotline, Kinberg attempted to develop a proper adaptation of the Dark Phoenix saga as the main storyline, but it received an even lower rating at 23%. One bad film had cascaded consequences for the entire franchise for over a decade until Disney acquired Fox, giving a chance for a full reboot of the X-Men within the Marvel Universe. Marvelous verdict. So, what happened? Well, one person happened. One person abandoned their work for another project, someone else tried to make something out of it, and it failed. Heavily. Miserably. You let go of a good thing, hoping to find greener pastures or whatever the reason was, and you don't find it. So you attempt to go back, only to find the pastures are gone and it's replaced by dead soil, where nothing can grow anymore. Not even weeds. It's like abandoning your work and expecting someone to finish it the same way you did, only they can't because they're not you. I am not sure what Singer was thinking when he left, but I'd never do something like that. What do you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below and I'll see you next time. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, be safe, and thanks everyone.